World War II is often understood through its dramatic battles and strategic maneuvers. Yet, beneath the clashes of armies, a more fundamental contest was waged, a war of industrial capacity and logistical might. This conflict was not merely about who could fight harder, but who could produce more, move it faster, and sustain the relentless demands of global warfare. Our analysis begins by examining how the seemingly mundane elements of factories, supply chains, and raw materials ultimately dictated the fate of nations. We will probe the macroeconomic underpinnings that transformed civilian industries into the true arsenals of democracy and dictatorship alike. At the war's outset, Germany possessed a significant, albeit concentrated, industrial base. Its highly efficient factories, particularly in metallurgy and chemicals, were geared for rapid rearmament under the Nazi regime. According to economic historian Adam Tooze, Germany's early lead was built on its strategy of speed and surprise, leveraging existing infrastructure for rapid conquest before the Allies could fully mobilize their latent economic power. This allowed the initial blitzkrieg campaigns to be well supplied, exploiting the Axis's early advantage in ready-to-deploy hardware. To understand the initial balance, we must look at the industrial output before 1939. Germany, though formidable, did not possess the raw aggregate potential of the future Allied powers. In 1938, Germany's steel production stood at approximately 23 million metric tons. This contrasted sharply with the combined potential of the United States, United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union, which collectively commanded immense, though not yet fully mobilized, industrial might. This underlying disparity would prove crucial as the war progressed from limited engagements to total global conflict. Germany's strategy for sustaining its war machine often involved resource acquisition through conquest. The invasions of France, Belgium, and later Eastern Europe were not solely territorial gains, they were also vital grabs for industrial capacity, raw materials, and labor. The resources of occupied territories, from Czech armaments factories to Ukrainian grain, were swiftly integrated into the German war economy. However, this fragmented supply chain, reliant on securing and maintaining control over vast, often hostile, territories, presented significant logistical vulnerabilities that would later prove critical. Despite territorial gains, the Axis powers faced inherent raw material deficiencies, particularly in oil and certain strategic minerals. Germany was heavily reliant on synthetic oil production from coal and imports from Romania, leaving its war machine vulnerable to disruptions. Japan, an island nation, depended almost entirely on overseas imports for resources like rubber, oil, and scrap metal, a fact that directly influenced its aggressive expansion into Southeast Asia. These dependencies created a fundamental logistical fragility that the Allies would relentlessly exploit. As the Germans pushed eastward, the Soviet Union undertook one of the most astonishing logistical feats in history, the relocation of entire industrial complexes. Between July and November 1941, over 2,500 factories, including 1,523 large enterprises, were dismantled, loaded onto trains, and moved thousands of miles east, beyond the Urals. This heroic effort, often performed under enemy fire, ensured the survival of Soviet war production. Historian Richard Overy emphasizes that this industrial evacuation was a powerful demonstration of the Soviet commitment to total war, laying the groundwork for eventual overwhelming material superiority on the Eastern Front. The entry of the United States into the war fundamentally shifted the global industrial balance. America's unparalleled manufacturing capacity, vast natural resources, and geographic insulation from direct attack provided an insurmountable advantage. The U.S. rapidly converted civilian industries to war production, transforming car factories into bomber plants and appliance manufacturers into munition suppliers. This mobilization, described by President Roosevelt as the arsenal of democracy, was a logistical marvel, scaling production to levels previously unimaginable and ultimately outstripping the combined output of all Axis powers. The scale of American industrial mobilization is difficult to overstate. From 1940 to 1945, the United States produced staggering quantities of war material. Its shipyards, for instance, launched over 5,000 merchant ships, including the iconic Liberty ships, and nearly 100 aircraft carriers. Aircraft production soared from just a few thousand annually before the war to nearly 100,000 planes in 1944 alone. This incredible output not only supplied American forces but also played a critical role in sustaining its allies through the Lend-Lease program, fundamentally altering the global balance of power. The Lend-Lease Act, enacted in March 1941, was a masterstroke of logistics and diplomacy. It allowed the United States to supply allied nations with food, oil, and material on credit, bypassing strict neutrality laws. Totaling over $50 billion, approximately $700 billion in today's money, Lend-Lease shipped millions of tons of crucial supplies across perilous oceans. From Sherman tanks to Spam, from locomotives to raw materials, this initiative provided the vital lifeline that kept the Soviet, British, and other Allied war efforts afloat, demonstrating the profound impact of a robust, far-reaching supply chain. The war also highlighted divergent production philosophies. Germany, despite its initial efficiency, often prioritized technologically advanced, complex designs, like the Tiger tank or Me-262 jet fighter. These superweapons required immense resources and production time. The Allies, particularly the US and Soviets, embraced mass production of simpler, robust, and easily reparable equipment, like the T-34 tank or the B-17 bomber. This contrast in approach ultimately meant that while Axis units might have technical superiority in some areas, they were consistently overwhelmed by the sheer volume of Allied material. The Atlantic Ocean became the most critical supply chain battleground. German U-boats relentlessly targeted Allied convoys transporting vital supplies from North America to Britain and the Soviet Union. The Battle of the Atlantic was a brutal, protracted struggle to maintain this crucial logistical link. Historian Max Hastings notes that without control of the Atlantic, Britain would have starved, and the Allied invasion of Europe would have been impossible. The development of escort carriers, radar, and improved anti-submarine tactics were not just military innovations, but fundamental safeguards for the Allied global supply chain. The sheer volume of goods moved by the Allies was a testament to their industrial and logistical superiority. Despite significant U-boat depredations, Allied shipyards relentlessly churned out new vessels. The peak year for Allied shipping construction, 1943, saw an astonishing 19 million deadweight tons of merchant shipping launched, primarily by American yards. This meant that losses, though heavy, could be quickly replaced, ensuring a continuous flow of supplies. Conversely, the Axis powers never achieved comparable levels of sea transport capacity, contributing to their isolated strategic positions. As the war progressed, Allied air power shifted its focus from tactical support to strategic bombing, directly targeting the Axis industrial and logistical infrastructure. Factory complexes, rail yards, oil refineries, and transportation hubs became primary targets. While early campaigns were controversial in their effectiveness, later precision bombing, particularly against German synthetic oil plants and railway networks, crippled the Axis war machine. The destruction of these critical nodes in the supply chain starved the front lines, highlighting how air superiority could directly impact ground forces' sustenance and mobility. By 1944-45, German logistics were in a state of terminal collapse. Relentless Allied bombing had decimated their railway network and fuel production facilities. According to General Guderian, the German panzer armies were literally running on fumes. Fuel shortages became so acute that entire divisions were immobilized. The inability to move troops, ammunition, and fuel rapidly meant that even when new equipment was produced, it often could not reach the front lines or operate effectively. This logistical breakdown, more than any single battle, sealed Germany's fate. The dependency on petroleum products underscored the critical nature of fuel logistics. Germany, primarily reliant on synthetic fuels and Romanian oil, saw its output plummet under Allied bombing. In contrast, the Allies had abundant access to natural oil reserves from the US and Middle East. By late 1944, German synthetic fuel production dropped by over 90%, crippling air operations and mechanized ground forces. This stark divergence in fuel access and delivery capacity directly translated into operational capabilities on the battlefield, proving that tanks and planes are only as effective as the fuel that powers them. The Allied powers demonstrated remarkable industrial resilience. Despite setbacks, their decentralized and geographically dispersed industrial bases proved difficult for the Axis to neutralize. The Soviet Union's relocated factories, Britain's protected island industries, and America's vast, untouched manufacturing heartland formed a network that was virtually immune to complete breakdown. This allowed a continuous, indeed escalating, flow of war materials to all fronts, overwhelming Axis attempts to disrupt production or supply chains. This resilience wasn't just about output, but about the ability to absorb blows and continue producing. By 1945, the material imbalance was absolute. On the Western Front, Allied armies had overwhelming superiority in tanks, artillery, and air power. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets, bolstered by Lend-Lease, were fielding millions of troops and tens of thousands of tanks and aircraft. The Axis simply could not compete. This wasn't just a numerical advantage, it was a qualitative difference in the reliability and sustainability of their supply lines. The final campaigns were not merely about pushing back armies, but about grinding down an enemy starved of fuel, ammunition, and replacements. In retrospect, World War II was as much an industrial and logistical contest as it was a military one. The ultimate victor was determined not just by the courage of soldiers or the brilliance of generals, but by the relentless hum of factories, the unwavering flow of supply convoys, and the strategic mastery of resource allocation. The Allies' ability to mobilize their immense industrial capacity, establish resilient global supply chains, and adapt their production philosophies proved decisive. The war demonstrated, with devastating clarity, that in modern global conflict, economic power and logistical domination are the ultimate determinants of victory.